So much so that he said to me afterwards, "Why, I've only just started doing this." He said, "I ought to have been doing it for 4 years, and the party ought to have been supporting me for 4 years, but hadn't."
Wilson sensed that the time was ripe for the next round with Heath.
The battle is on. The Prime Minister has taken the plunge. A general election on June the 18th.
When we started the election, we were running about 10 to 12% behind the Labour Party, having moved in the space of about 3 or 4 months from being in a very commanding position to being in this very, very terrible position. And so it looked as if it was going to be awful.
The 1970 election was the epicenter of the Heath-Wilson duel. For Heath, it was personal.
What I'm going to create is a new style of government, which is honest, which is well thought out, and which takes account of the long term, away with all the short-term gimmickry and instant government which we've had for the last few years. This, I believe, is the best...
Ted wanted not just a change of policy, but a change of style, and that was all a dig at what he thought was the sheer flippancy of Wilson.
But Heath's serious message seemed to be missing the mark once again.
I was sat on by people from all over the country who said that Heath was the drawback, the grocer's mind, the lack of vision, the inarticulateness, and that candidates were tearing the photograph of the leader out of the manifesto before putting it through people's doors when canvassing because Ted was a complete turn-off.
There was a newlywed couple in a restaurant, I remember, and everybody, all the press, were waiting to see if Ted would actually go and talk to the couple and wish them well, and he didn't. He didn't for about a quarter of an hour. He just sat there rather solidly, eating whatever he was eating. And then, as soon as the press had gone, he went up and went over and was very nice and jolly, and they were impressed. But, he completely missed the boat as far as the press was concerned, who scribbled, "Can't even be bothered to pass the time of day with a newlywed couple," that kind of thing. This kind of episode was constantly happening.
Wilson, by contrast, was avoiding the issues, but glad-handing the people.
Prime Minister, you haven't actually kissed any babies yet, but you come very close to it sometimes. Why did you choose this particular style of campaign?
I wanted to take the campaign to where the people were, not to ask them to come, especially on hot summer evenings or weekends, to city halls miles from where they lived.
Wilson had treated the election as if it was a kind of coronation, sort of went around the country sort of waving at people and this kind of thing, didn't really make any speeches much or anything like that.
Harold had got the idea, he'd seen the Queen doing walkabouts, so he concluded that his role would be to be seen around the place, being filmed everywhere. He saw himself as being above politics, which he wasn't. You can't be a Prime Minister and above politics. And you couldn't play the part of the Queen, as I think he rather hoped he might.
It's Teresa's birthday. Shall we sing for her? Yeah. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Rather in desperation, because Wilson was doing so well with his walkabouts, we put it in. And I remember in Chatham and Rochester, we did that. We did it in Edinburgh, in Princes Street. And then we gained confidence, and he gained confidence, and he was rather good at it.
He's having to do rather belatedly what I started doing a week last Sunday. I'm sure he'll be encouraged to know that I'm at the moment 29 marginals ahead of him, so he'll have to get round at quite a rate if he's going to catch up.
Oh, it doesn't worry me very much what he says. I've covered practically all the marginals in this country with our party workers. I've covered them all in between elections anyhow. He hasn't been seeing them. What I've been doing is speaking at meetings at which the party workers from all the marginals have been there.
Some of the walkabouts were terrible. I always remember one in Norwich, in which I had to participate. We chose a half-day's holiday anyhow. We walked down a street in Norwich, a long street in Norwich, and there was absolutely no one there at all. There wasn't a sign of anyone.
It seemed that Harold Wilson was about to humiliate his rival once again, and he was enjoying every minute of it.
Perhaps you could point to the last election in which a party won the election with its leader trailing behind the other leader in the personal ratings, particularly if you can find one where he was trailing nearly 2-1 behind the other leader.
I mean, we had 14% lead in the Daily Mail the Friday before polling day. But then, over the weekend, and with the trade figures and everything else, all fell apart.
3 days before the country went to the polls, the latest balance of trade figures, then the critical indicator of how Britain's economy was doing, were released. For the first time in months, they were in deficit. Then, on election eve, one opinion poll put Heath just ahead. The experts said it was a rogue poll.
A very famous political correspondent, Robert Carville, said on The World at One, "The opinion poll's phony. Take it from me, Labour's home and dry. I went to the Tory press conference this morning and saw Mr Heath fighting for the soul of the Conservative Party in defeat." We waited then for the results to come in. And the first results that came in showed quite a swing towards us. We could hardly believe our ears or our eyes when we saw the results coming in.
David Howe, Conservative, 27,203.
And then we drove back to London. And the radio kept on producing the most extraordinary news.
Has been duly elected to serve as member.
That we were winning. We were not winning just at this seat and that seat. We were winning the whole damned election.
Clark, Conservative, 14,000.
I was delighted not so much because Labour was losing, but because all those clever, well-informed people who'd been with us for the last fortnight, 3 weeks, were going to have to eat their words. Two of them had actually been writing a book explaining why Ted had lost, you know, and they had to rewrite it rather rapidly.
I was with him in Bexley when it was clear he'd won. Great surprise, but he says not to him.
How do you feel at this moment?
I feel in excellent form. I've thoroughly enjoyed this campaign. I've enjoyed today, particularly here in my own constituency, and I'm delighted with tonight's result here in Bexley, and I'm much encouraged by the results in the rest of the country.
Labour has suffered serious losses in these, a net loss, you see, which is enough to knock...
In his suite in the Adelphi Hotel near his constituency in Huyton,
The Tories have a net...
Harold Wilson watched the shock results come in.
Well, the great upset has occurred.
It's a really, really mortal blow to Wilson. He'd actually gone to press conferences. People would ask questions about the party's prospects, and he'd say, you know, you tell me the last time a party whose leader lagged behind the rival by 12 points. Last time that party won the election. He was terrible given to bragging, Wilson. And so he got his comeuppance.
Some applause from the people outside, small crowd of spectators.
It was unpleasant on the day. I mean, I looked out the window at the fronts onto number 10, and there was a goodly crowd of Tories booing us and waiting to see us go. It's not nice.
But to all intents and purposes, you've now given up any hope of...
Well, I think the figures speak for themselves.
When do you expect to go to the palace?
That I don't know.
We got to number 10, and there was quite a big crowd there as well. So we were feeling pretty pleased about life by that time. And Ted was in very, very good form. And of course, we then wanted something to drink. And Harold, Wilson's secretary, said that all they'd got were a few sandwiches and a glass of beer. And I think we wanted rather more than that. I think we could do with a little champagne on an occasion of that nature.
The Queen has asked me to form the next government, and I am indeed proud to accept. To govern is to serve.
I was sitting with my predecessor in the private office, and the door opened from the cabinet room, and the Prime Minister came in, and he looked at me and said, "Oh, are you here? It's going to be very hard work, you know," and went back into the cabinet room. This seemed a very sort of offhand rather off-putting way, in a way of welcoming me into the team. But then he was like that, and you got used to it.
Heath offered the Wilsons the use of the Prime Minister's country house, Chequers, while they looked for somewhere to live. But there was a strange sequel to do with Wilson's dog.
He was called Paddy, a big yellow Labrador that he was always being photographed with it, taking it down to the Scilly Islands and that sort of a thing. But I think he felt he ought to have a dog, because when he left the dog. And he left Chequers, and to my total amazement, when we went down there after he'd gone, the dog was still there. I don't think Ted really liked the dog. I think he thought he was looking at Wilson every time. I was a bit worried that the dog might... Yeah, but it was actually quite a nice dog.
Wilson was gone, and eventually Paddy went with him too. But for Heath, Wilson was to be out of mind as well as out of sight.
The first thing he wants to do is to get rid of every taint of the dreadful Harold Wilson. So the wallpaper goes, in comes all of Heath's kind of furniture that he's been amassing over the years, in comes the piano. And this is classic Heath. He sees Wilson as a kind of disease that he wants to eradicate completely from British politics. Instead of learning the lessons from Wilson's time, particularly Wilson's emphasis on public relations, that all has to go. Everything must go. Whitewash the lot. And that's, I think, a great failing of Heath's, his over-obsession with Wilson.
The morning after the election, Wilson had shown some generosity to his victorious opponent.
Could we look at the campaign just for a moment? What are your feelings this morning towards Mr. Heath? Did you admire him as an opponent?
You know, I've always admired him, and I've said this a number of times, much more than many other people, even in his own party.
But behind closed doors, Wilson was fuming. Defeat had been unthinkable, and it was now personal.
A few weeks later, over a very trivial matter, he suddenly lost his temper. I only, in all the time I knew Wilson, only saw him lose his temper twice. And that was one of the times. The sheer dismay and disappointment must have been seething inside him.
He didn't like to talk about it, but he sometimes referred to it, and how humiliating it was to be bundled out of number 10 Downing Street, out through the back door, with his furniture carried out while Ted Heath came through the front door.
And his whole objective after that was to be able to walk back into number 10 Downing Street as Prime Minister.
Heath pitched camp to tackle the serious business of government, which he believed Wilson had so trivialized.
We begin Panorama live from number 10.
People must face up to their own responsibilities. And when I say people, I mean all of us. The government has certain responsibilities to change policies as we are doing.
Wilson had arrived at number 10 with the white heat of technology, but that had fizzled out. Heath's plans were even bigger.
Heath had a couple of really large ideas about how to change Britain, entering Europe, and also huge building projects. Heath started building the Channel Tunnel, that's lost to history now. He wanted to build a huge offshore airport off the coast of Essex, which is very similar to what Boris Johnson wants to do now. So Heath had big ideas.
But almost immediately, Heath suffered a major setback. His new Chancellor, Ian MacLeod, considered the cleverest Tory of his generation, died suddenly in Downing Street.
The telephone rang at home, and the Prime Minister came on the line and said, in a flat kind of voice, "Ian's dead, you'd better come in." And so, though it was 10:30, I went straight in, of course. And I did then feel that it was very lonely sitting up in that great house without a wife, without anybody close to him, as it were. But he always denied that he was lonely until very late in his life.
Heath had huge battles ahead. Now he would have to face them without his closest ally. First up were the unions that had so plagued Wilson. Within Heath's first month, council workers struck. Then the lights went out in an electricity dispute.